Masechet Makkot Daf Zayin, in which we hope to complete the first perek and begin the second perek of the Masechet Mishnah. Mi shenigmar dino ubarach uba lifnei oto bet din en sotrin et dino. Someone was convicted of capital punishment in a certain court, and after he got the verdict, but before they were able to execute him, he ran away, he escaped. And then he was brought back to that very same court. They do not overturn his verdict and try him again, like, oh, maybe now he left, he got away, he came back, let's try him again, maybe this time he'll be innocent. No, we don't do that. This is the same guy. As long as we verify it's the same person that was already given a verdict of capital punishment, they go ahead and execute him immediately. כל מקום שיעמדו שניים ויאמרו מעידים אנו באיש פלוני שנגמר דינו בבית דין של פלוני ופלוני ופלוני עדיו, הרי זה ייהרג. And that's true not only in the same court that gave him the original verdict. If he runs away and comes back, they kill him. But that's true in any place, any other court. If there's two witnesses that come and say, we testify about this individual, that he was given a verdict in that bet din, and the witnesses were this person and that person, as long as the two witnesses are able to verify all of this information, then that court relies on those two witnesses to say, yep, this guy, he deserves capital punishment, and they will administer it, even if it's in a different court. Sanhedrin noheget ba'aretz u'b'chosa la'aretz. You can have a Sanhedrin, that's a court of 23 people. You need 23 judges in order to give capital punishment, and you can make such a court in Israel and outside the land of Israel. As Rambam explains, that you need a Sanhedrin in Israel to give semicha, to authorize the court outside the land of Israel to issue capital punishment. So it is dependent. However, one can make a Jewish court, a halachic court, outside the land of Israel, and as long as, I guess, the foreign authorities will permit such a thing, they can also give a verdict of capital punishment and other punishments. Sanhedrin haoreget echad b'shavua נקראת חובלנית. רבי אליעזר בן עזריה אומר, 1 שנה. רבי טרפון ורבי עקיבא אומרים, אילו היינו בסנהדרין, לא נהרג אדם מעולם. Famous Mishnah that a Sanhedrin that kills someone once every 7 years is considered a violent court. That is a lot. That is the first opinion, Tanakama. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, or should be Elazar ben Azariah, says once every 70 years is considered a violent court, right? Because there's lots of ways to find that someone is innocent. If you're not 100% sure, then we do not give capital punishment. So once in 70 years, that's already, wow, that's a violent court. And Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva say, if we were on the Sanhedrin, we would never kill anyone. So even though capital punishment is officially on the books, it's a Torah law, but in effect, they would abolish capital punishment. They would always find some way out not to kill a person. However, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, Afhen marbin shofchei damim b'Yisrael. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees with Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva and says, if you follow them, then you would increase murderers in Israel, because if everybody knew, oh, even if I go and commit many murders, I'm not going to get capital punishment, then there would be no deterrent or little deterrent. And then there will be more crime, more murders. And so Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says you need to have capital punishment when people are really guilty. Of course, you do all the safeguards to make sure that you're not going to kill an innocent person, but it's important that guilty people do get capital punishment so that that will be a deterrent for others not to commit crimes. Now we bring up what looks like a contradiction between the first clause of the Mishnah and the second clause of the Mishnah. The first one says, if he runs away and comes back to that very same court, then they do not overturn his verdict, but rather that same court will kill him. So that means if he comes to the very same court, then we go ahead with the verdict and we kill him. But if we had just that line, just that clause in the Mishnah, then that would imply that if he came to a different court, then the new court would say, well, we didn't try this case, we have to open it up again and try it ourselves. That's what it would seem if we had only the first. That contradicts what says explicitly in the next part of the Mishnah, that any place that there's two people that come and say, we testify that this person was given a guilty verdict in that bet din, and these are the witnesses, then he is killed in another bet din. So how do we reconcile what we infer from the first clause with what it says explicitly in the second clause? And Nabi says, no problem. It depends. If one is going from outside the land of Israel, where the original verdict was, to Israel, then the new court in Israel, because it's a higher level, they retry the court. They retry the case. And that's what it means in the first clause. If you went to the very same bet din, then they will kill the person. Yes, that's true. Let's say it was the original one was in Bavel, and then he ran away and came back to the same bet din in Bavel. Then they don't try him again, they just kill him. But if he runs away to Israel, then he gets a new trial because of the elevated status of the courts in Israel. But the other way around, that's what the Sefer is talking about, bechutz ha'aretz. If they were originally tried in Israel and then they ran away to Bavel or any other place, so then the other place will abide by the verdict that was already given in Israel and just kill him and not try him again. And that's what the second clause of the Mishnah means. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda ben Dostai Omer Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach Barach Ma'aretz L'chutz Ha'aretz En Sotrin Etino Mechutz Ha'aretz La'aretz Sotrin Etino Mipnei Zechuta Shel Eretz Yisrael. And we have a braita that supports this explanation of Abaye, where Rabbi Yehuda ben Dostai says, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Shatach, if someone runs from Israel to outside of Israel, then we do not overturn the verdict. Outside of Israel respects the verdict in Israel. But the other way around, if he runs from outside the land of Israel to the land of Israel, then they do overturn his verdict because of the great merit of Eretz Yisrael, that in Eretz Yisrael the courts are considered more respected, and so they don't have to abide by the ruling outside of Israel. They will retry the case. Sanhedrin Oheget, the next part of the Mishnah says that one can make a Sanhedrin both in the land of Israel and outside the land of Israel. That's a court of 23 judges in order to adjudicate capital cases. What's the source? Let's look at the pasuk in context. This whole chapter is talking about various kinds of murder on purpose, by mistake, and then it concludes and says, such shall be the law, your law of procedure throughout the ages, in all your settlements. So that means everywhere, wherever you live, and you might live in Israel, you might live outside of Israel, and yes, you can adjudicate these cases. So they need a Sanhedrin of 23. Applies everywhere. Now, if it's going to be everywhere, then why does it say in your gates, which actually seems to be limiting? If it just say this will be chukat olam lidorotechem, forever, so then of course we'd have to do it everywhere. What does bisharecha come to specify? Bisharecha tamoshi bate dinim bechol pelech upelech bechol ir va'ir bechol salades tamoshi bechol pelech upelech v'yata moshiv bechol ir va'ir. So bisharecha is actually telling you in your gates, the ones that you own, the one that you're in charge of in Eretz Yisrael. So when you're in Eretz Yisrael, so then you have to make courts in every district and every city. It's assuming that you're sovereign there, and therefore you have to have a full judicial system, all right? And so you need that in every city and every part. However, outside the land of Israel, we're assuming you're under foreign rule. So there, you don't have to take care of all of the judiciary for the entire country, but you have to do it for your own. So there, you have to make one in every district, so that wherever you live, in whatever country, in Bavel, so you'll have one somewhat close by. But you don't have to make it in every city because it's not your country, and so the requirements are different. And Bisharecha is saying, if it's in your gates, that's in Israel, then you need every city. But outside the land of Israel, then you have to have it only in every area, in every district. Sanhedrin Haoreget, the next part of the Mishnah, says that if a court kills someone once every 7 years, it's called a violent court, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said once every 70 years. So we ask according to him, when Rabbi it says Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says once every 70 years, does that mean that once every 70 years, that ratio itself would be considered a violent court and has to be less than that, it has to be once every 71, once every 100 years, that's okay. Once every 70 years itself is a bad ratio? Or does he mean that one person in every 70 years, that's normal, that's good. If it's more than that, that's where the problem is. So which was 1 to 70, is that the good, or is that already not good? And this question is left standing. Rabbi Akiva says, if we were on the Sanhedrin, they already lived long after when already there was no Sanhedrin Gadol and they couldn't give people capital punishment under the Romans in their time. He says, but if we were there, we would make sure never to kill anybody. Hechi havu abdi. So how would they do that? Because they have to adjudicate a case. If someone comes with witnesses and says this person did such a thing, so he asks questions, but what if they answer all the questions right? So then you have to find a reason to get a person off of capital punishment. So how would they get every case off of capital punishment? If it was a case of murder, they would say the murder victim, was he a healthy person, shalem, or maybe a terefa? Terefa is someone that has some disease, an underlying disease, that he would not have survived for 12 months. Now, a lot of the time, it's not going to be something that you can see out in the open. But only after maybe you examine the body, then after the person dies, then maybe you could tell if the person had such a thing. So we add, and now the law is, if someone kills a terefa, although it's not permitted, they don't get capital punishment for it, because the person was, that's the law, terefa, he would have died anyway, is not considered fully alive for one to get capital punishment. So we ask the witnesses, do you know, was the murder victim, was he perfectly healthy and he would have lived more than 12 months? Or maybe he was terefa, maybe he had some problem with his lungs or some other organ, and that presumably the witnesses are not going to know. They're not physicians, and even a physician may not know some hidden disease. And so they would not be able to answer the question correctly, they wouldn't be sure, or they'd contradict each other, and then they would let the murderer go. And so that's one example of how they would find any case of murder. Basically, this question would be unanswerable. And then they could say, oh, you don't know, maybe he doesn't deserve capital punishment. So for any doubt, we let him go. And Rav Ashi says, and even if you would say that they checked the body after, let's say, he stabbed him, and it turns out in the body, the lungs were fine, all the organs were fine, and we did a check, and in fact, there was nothing wrong with the person, was not a terefa. Even in that case, they would be able to get the murderer off of capital punishment by saying, wait a second, maybe the knife went into him precisely where there was a hole in his lung. And that's why you couldn't see it. Maybe he was a terefa, but he just happened, the murderer happened to put the knife right in that spot. So there was a hole before, now there's a hole, but you couldn't tell that there was a hole before. So even this very far-fetched possibility before x-rays that the murderer was able to find exactly where the hole in the lungs were that showed a terefa, well, it's very unlikely, but it's possible, and even based on that, Rabbi Akiva would never kill a murderer. Now it's okay for murder, because then you could say the person was a terefa. But how about someone who commits some forbidden sexual relations? So there's witnesses, they see this happening. So how are they going to get the guy who commits this sin off the hook? And Abaye, they say, we ask the witnesses, did you see graphically, exactly, they use an example of a brush that goes in a tube. This is for makeup, and so this is a mashal for the sexual act. Did you actually see up close and see the sin, right? Maybe they were just near each other, but maybe there was no penetration like that. And so usually witnesses aren't going to see that close to be able to know, and so they say, well, then they're off the hook. But Rabbanan hechi dainu. Now we have to turn the question against Rabbanan, who say we do sometimes kill someone for capital crimes, and prohibited relations would be a capital crime. So how would they ever kill someone of committing forbidden relations? Because usually they're not going to see such a thing so graphically. And the answer is Kedishmuel Damash Shemuel ben Bimin Ha'afim Mishayera'u Kimin Ha'afim. They follow the opinion of Shemuel. Shemuel says when you see adulterers, when they're acting like adulterers, you don't have to see up close exactly the physical act. If you just see them acting in the way that adulterers do, then presumably they did sin, and that's sufficient, and that's how Rabbanan would put to death someone who was caught doing such forbidden actions. Hadran alach kesad ha'edim. We next begin the first Mishnah of the second Perek. Mishnah Eluhen Hagolin Haoreg Nefesh Bishkaga. The following deserve exile. They have to go to Ir HaMiklat, someone who kills by mistake. Hayab me'agel b'ma'agila v'nefla alav v'haragatu. Hayab mishasher b'chabit v'nefla alav v'haragatu. Hayab yored b'sulam aven nafal alav v'haragatu. Hareh zeh goleh. We're going to see a difference between someone doing something that falls on the way down or falls on the way up. So, if someone is rolling a roller, here's on his roof, you'd use this to smooth out the tar that one puts on the roof, kind of like a steamroller. And so their roofs were mostly flat, but they had some slope on them so that the rain would fall down. So, if someone is rolling a roller downwards and then it breaks, it slips, and it falls on someone, or if someone is lowering down a barrel from the roof and then it slips out of his hand and falls and kills someone, or if the person himself was going down a ladder and he fell off the ladder and he fell on top of someone else and killed that person beneath him, in all these cases that person goes into exile. He should have been more careful. So actually, shogeg is not a total mistake, as we're going to see. If it's something that was totally out of his hands, then there's no punishment at all. That's called ones. If it was on purpose, that's mezid, he gets the death penalty. Shogeg, the middle category in which one goes to Ir Miklat, is where, listen, he was going on the way down. He should have been more careful to make sure that it wouldn't go too fast or slip out of his hands, or that he would fall. However, if someone was pulling the roller on the roof upwards towards him, and then it fell, or he was lifting up a barrel, he was bringing it up onto the roof, and so the rope snapped and it fell and killed someone. But if he's going up the ladder and then he fell, then he does not go to Ir Miklat, because that's called ones. So that's the basic difference. And generally, if you're pulling something up that you need up on the roof, so you're making sure that it's going to keep going up. You don't want it to go down at all. So if it goes down, that is a complete mistake. That's ones. Whereas if you're lowering it down, especially let's say it's something that you don't need, not like a piano that you have to keep it careful, but let's say it's just garbage. So you're lowering it down, so you don't want to go too fast and hit someone. But if it goes a little faster, it's in your interest, so you're not so careful. So that's the idea. When generally when something is going down, you kind of want it to go down somewhat, just not so fast, but you're not being so careful. And by not being so careful, that shows that one is being negligent, and that's why one is somewhat liable. It's still a mistake. Nobody wants to have something fall down or wants to fall off a ladder onto something, but it's generally people will be a little less careful when lowering something as opposed to when they're raising it up. So that is the general rule. Anything that falls and kills someone on its way down, that's called negligent, and he goes to exile. Whereas if it's not on the way down, but rather pulling it up, then he does not go into exile. What's the source for this rule? Shmuel derives it from this pasuk that we can see inside. The context is, we're going to quote this pasuk in a minute so we could see the context. This whole perek is talking about different types of killing, on purpose, not on purpose. If it's all of a sudden, a surprise, and it was not premeditated, it was not because he was hated, someone pushes someone else, or he threw something on him, but it was not intentional, he was not hunting him out, or he dropped something on the other person, a stone, and killed him, but he didn't didn't see him, vayapel alav vayamot, and he threw it down upon him, and he dies. V'lo yeblo, he's not an enemy. Lo mekeshtato, there's no relationship before that we know that this guy hated the other guy and was trying to kill him, because then in that case, if he was trying to kill him before and he hated him, then we assume wasn't a mistake, it was on purpose. But if there's no prior hatred between them, then we assume it was a mistake. We learn this here, vayapel alav, if it falls on him, that's the main thing for Shemuel. Vayapel alav, only if it goes the way of falling, meaning he wanted it to go down, and then it went down too fast and killed someone. But if it was on the way up, then he didn't want to fall at all. He didn't want to go down. So then one is exempt. Tenor banan bishkaga perat mezid v'bli da'at perat mitkaven. So now this baraita notices that in Bemidbar, in that same chapter that we just read, it talks about mezid and shogeg. Talk about shogeg. Whereas in Devarim it says bibli da'at, also in the context of someone who kills by mistake. So what's the difference between these, and what is it excluding? And according to the baraita, bishkaga means if someone kills bishogeg, then they go into exile, but not if they do so bimezid, meaning in a premeditated way. Then that would be the death penalty. And then in Devarim, where it says biblidat, without awareness, that comes to exclude someone who mitkaven, who has kavana, who has intention or awareness. Now, what exactly is the difference between mezid and mitkaven? So we'll see further in the Gemara's discussion. Mezid peshita bar ketalahu. So we ask about the first one. Really, do you need a word bishkaga to tell you that only if it's shogeg you go to ir miklat, but if it's mezid, if it's on purpose, premeditated, then you don't? Obviously not. You get capital punishment if it's mezid. So you don't need a pasuk to tell me that you don't go to ir miklat. Ela marava ema pirat laomer mutar. Rather, bishkaga is coming to exclude someone who says, oh, I thought murder was permitted. To such a person we say, you thought murder was permitted? Okay, listen, if you really thought murder was permitted, you're not going to get the death penalty, because you only give the death penalty to someone who has a warning. And so that means there was someone a warning. Don't you know this is prohibited and you're going to get the death penalty? He says, yes, I know so. So obviously there was no warning because he thought it was permitted. But as someone who thinks it was permitted, that's close to doing it on purpose, because you have to know. It means like you really didn't want to know what the law was. So you could be ignorant, but this kind of ignorance is really something that you should have known. We expect everybody to know that murder is not allowed. And if he thinks it's allowed, so that's more like mezid, and he doesn't deserve the benefit of going into exile and the atonement that brings. Amar Abaye says, hold on, maybe you say the opposite. If someone thinks it's permitted, well then we should call him anus, because he thought it was totally allowed. Like, let's say it's a certain scenario where it seems like it could be allowed. It looks like self-defense or something like that. So he thought in this particular scenario it was allowed. So then that should be called ones. So not the opposite, that is almost mezid. However, Rava answers, no, I disagree with that. When it comes to murder, you're supposed to know. And if you say, well, I didn't know, that's not really a good excuse, and it's too close to mezid. And that's why one does not have the benefit of going to Ir Miklat just because he says he doesn't know. And that's what this pasuk means. Bishkaga, Pirat Mezid, that Bishkaga, only if you did it by mistake. But if you thought it was permitted, then that you don't go into exile, because that's close to mezid. Biblidat perata mitkaven. The Braita continues and says, the word in Devarim that says without awareness, that's coming to exclude someone who has intention. If he has intention, then he doesn't go into exile. We ask, mitkaven peshita bar ketalahu. If he has intention, obviously he doesn't go into exile. That's like on purpose, and so therefore he deserves the death penalty. Amar Rabba perata mitkaven. So the Rabbi explains, no, here's what the Baraita means, that if someone has intention to kill, but to kill someone or something for which one does not get the death penalty. So there's three examples. For example, if he wants to kill an animal, so he's out hunting and he goes and shoots towards an animal, but there's people around there and he ends up killing a person. So this is not mezid exactly, it's not on purpose, but it's not, it's not shogeg either, because he really should have been much more careful. This is almost on purpose, and therefore he doesn't get the benefit of going into exile. So what are you doing? You're trying to kill something, this animal, but you're just shooting out there when there's people around. So that's too much liability to be able to go into exile. Or if he intended to kill a non-Jew and he kills a Jew, killing a non-Jew also is not allowed, but it's not the death penalty. Or if you intended to kill a non-viable baby, so a non-viable baby also you're not allowed to kill, but there's not the death penalty because it was not going to live anyway. And he ended up by mistake, he went the wrong way and killed a viable person, which would be murder. So he didn't intend to kill that person that's totally healthy, but he did in the end. But his intention was in fact to kill someone or something else. So in these cases, this is not called shogeg because he did intend to kill someone or something, and therefore he doesn't get the benefit of atonement of going into exile. Tenor banan im bepeta perat lekeren zavit. Now that pasuk that we read before in Bemidbar, that lists all kinds of cases. So what does each phrase come to exclude or include? Some of them are excluding, some of them are including. So tenor banan im bepeta, if he comes suddenly, so that comes to exclude someone who comes suddenly, like from a corner. Let's say someone is carrying a knife outwards and he's walking down the road and he comes to a corner and someone else is coming from the other side to the same corner, and the guy with the knife stabs the other one. So this person is close to mezid. What are you doing? You're acting in a very dangerous way, carrying a knife. It's one thing if it's out in the open so people can avoid you, but you're coming to a corner where there's going to be other people coming from the other way, and then you kill a person. So it's not exactly premeditated, but this is too negligent and therefore does not get exile. Below eba perat lesoneh. Without enmity, this comes to exclude someone who hates the other person. If we know this person is an enemy of that person and wants him dead, and then suddenly, somehow, right, something drops, he drops something and kills that person, then we can assume that this was not a total mistake, but this was somewhat on purpose, and therefore also does not get the benefit of going to exile and that atonement. Hadafo shedechafo begufo. So this one seems to be an inclusive one, that if someone pushes someone else and then they die, so still they can go into exile, because just because I pushed someone, okay, I was annoyed at him and I pushed them. I didn't intend for them to die. I pushed them and then, they tripped and they hit their head and they cracked their skull and they died, but that was not intentional. So even though you shouldn't have pushed people because it could hurt them, but this is still far from being guilty of premeditated murder, and therefore that person can go into exile even though he pushed someone. O hishlich alav lahabi yedidashi sorech aliyah. The next phrase in the pasuk that says, or he threw it upon him. This comes to include in going into exile someone who lowers something for the purpose of raising it up. For example, let's say someone wants to raise something up high over his head, but to do that more easily, he lowers it down so then he can swing it all the way up. Now, we saw before that generally, only if you're moving something on the way down and you kill someone, then you go into exile. But if it's on the way up, then not so. So over here, since my final goal is actually to go upwards, I might have thought that since eventually I want to go up, that one would not go into exile for this. And that's why Ohishlich Alav comes to include this case, that if I'm going down, even though I'm going down only for the purpose of later on bringing it back up, nevertheless, at that point, if on the way down, when I swing it on the way down before it goes up, if I kill someone at that point, that is called going down, and that would be the same as any other going down where one does go into exile. The phrase without sidiyah, literally that means without lying in wait, like if you're hunting, so that would be premeditated. But this midrash takes sidiyah not as lying in wait, but rather from the word sad, this way, a certain direction. So if someone intended to throw something in one direction and then he had really bad aim and it went in a different direction altogether, then he does not go into exile because this is bordering on intentional. What are you doing? You're throwing something in the middle of a public area where there's people around. Well, you have to be more careful to make sure that it goes in the direction that you want and doesn't go randomly, right? If you're just doing a practice shooting your gun and you goes in one direction. Oh, you killed someone because you had bad aim and it went somewhere else. So maybe it's not premeditated, but this is not total. This is not called negligent. It's more mezid. Okay, now we continue with more derashot on a different pasuk. That was from Bamidbar. There's a similar pasuk in Shemot that also says Vasher lo sada, and here again we interpret it not as lying in wait, but rather sad in this case to be right next to someone. Perat mitkaven lizrok shetayim vezarak arba. Let's say I have some item and I mean to throw it just 2 amot, very close by, but I don't know my own strength and I throw it farther than I intended, and it goes 4 amot. And then it kills someone over there. So I should have been more careful. If I know that I'm going to, let's say, shoot an arrow, and I think it's only going to go close by, but then it goes farther and kills someone. So I should have been more careful. So that's too close to mezid to deserve the atonement of exile. And now we quote yet another context from Sefer Devarim that talks about the law of a roseach that goes into exile and he lives there and he won't be killed. It's someone who kills someone else. Biblidat ulosonelo. He realized he doesn't hate him from before. And a man that goes with another into a grove to cut wood, and then he swings the axe and so on. So this phrase asher yavo, he comes to the forest. Why does it have to say that he goes to the forest? So just like a forest is a place where everybody has permission to come in, both the victim and the perpetrator, they have permission to go into the forest. So too, the law of exile for killing someone by mistake applies anytime both of them are in open place that everybody is able to come into. That comes to exclude private property. If I'm cutting down trees and doing things, even dangerous things on my own property, and someone else comes and trespasses, I didn't give them permission, they come in, and then something falls on them, or I'm doing something dangerous and I kill them, so then I am not responsible. Who asked you to come into my private property? I'm only responsible if we're both in a public place where we're both allowed to go. Then I have to be more careful about other people that might be there. Rabbi Abhu Rabbi Yochanan, היה עולה בסולם ונשמעת השליבה מתחתיו ונפלה והרגה, מהו? Rabbi Abhu asked Rabbi Yochanan, what if I'm going up a ladder? So we already said that if I'm going up and I fall, so then I'm not liable to go into exile because that's honest. But what if, as I'm going up, one of the rungs, as I'm pushing down on it to push myself up, the rung itself falls down. So that's the question. Is that called going up or going down? Do we focus on the person? I was trying to go up, and therefore I'm not liable at all, even though the item went down. Or do we focus on this thing? By boosting myself up, I also push down on the rung, and that as I'm pushing down and it goes down, so that could be considered on the way down, and then I would have to go into exile for that. See, the Mishnah only talked about a case where I'm going up a ladder and I fall down. There, I'm not liable, but here the rung is falling down. What do we call that? Kihai gavna aliyahi or yeridahi. In this case, is that considered going up and no, not liable, or is that considered going down and then one would be liable to go into exile? Amar le, Rabbi Yochanan answers, kevar nagata berida shehi lesorech aliyah. And so Rabbi Yochanan says, oh, this is the very case that was mentioned in the Baraita of going down for the purpose of going up. And it said we include that. That's also considered the same as going down. So even though my final goal is to boost myself up, but in the meantime, in order to get myself up, I'm pushing the rung down. So that is called going down, and therefore one would be liable to go into exile. Rabbi Abu asked, hold on, in the ending of the Mishnah, it says, here's a general rule. Now, I already gave examples, 3 examples of each one. So what is this general rule coming to include? So when it says, here's a general rule, anytime you're going down, you go into exile. But if you're not going down, then you don't go into exile. Not going down, what is that coming to include that you don't go into exile? Is it not coming to include this case, this very case? And therefore this would be a challenge to the Rabbi Yochanan's answer, because from that extra phrase in the Baraita, in the Mishnah, it sounds like Shelo Yidei Chidato. That's talking about when I'm trying to go up and push something down, push the rung down, and it says Eno Goleh. So we answer to that, if so, what about this part of the kalal? That's also an extra phrase. What is that coming to include? Isn't that, well, you could also say that that's coming to include this very case. And so therefore, you can't say that either of these phrases, either kol shebederech hidato is goleh, or the other phrase, shelo bederech hidato eno goleh. You can't say that either of these phrases is coming to include this case of a rung being pushed down and falling down, because if it comes to include that case, then we would have contradictory things. Ela leotuye kasab, hachaname leotuye kasab. Rather, we have to say that this phrase, shelo bederech hidato, is coming to include the case of a butcher. And therefore, this first case is also coming to include the case of a butcher. And so this kalal at the end of the Mishnah has nothing to do with the ladder and the rung falling down case. And so the Rabbi Yochanan's answer stands. But now we're going to learn about the laws of a butcher, that this part of the Mishnah, Zeh Kalal, both parts of it are coming to teach us something new about this case. All right, what's the case of a butcher? De Tanya, Kasav Sheya Mekasev, Tana Chada, Lefanav Chayav, Lacharav Patur. ותניא אידך, לאחריו חייב, לפניו פטור. ותניא אידך, בין לפניו בין לאחריו חייב. ותניא אידך, בין לפניו בין לאחריו פטור, ולה קשיא. So in fact, when it comes to a butcher, there are 4 different baraitot, each one different from the other, but they're actually all consistent. So we're talking about a butcher, and generally when the butcher wants to get momentum, so he takes his knife and he sends it behind him, and then as it's going down behind him, it's going down. But then he has an upward motion behind him, and then a forward motion in front of him. So really, you have 4 different scenarios. Let's say the knife is in front of him, the cleaver is in front of him, maybe starts off. So then he's going up in front of him, then down behind him, and then up behind him, and then down in front of him. So that's the front and back that we're talking about. So here we have 4 baraitot. The first baraita says that the butcher that was butchering something, so the first baraita says if it's in front of him, he's liable. Behind him, he's not liable. The second one says if it's behind him, he's liable. In front of him, he's not liable. The opposite. And there's a third baraita that says whether it's in front of him or behind him, he is liable. And the last baraita says whether it's in front of him or behind him, he is not liable. But there's no contradiction between any of these. Kan b'yerida shelefanav aliyah sheleacharav. Kan b'aliyah shelefanav yerida sheleacharav. The first baraita that says that in front of him one is liable, that was talking about a case where he's moving the cleaver down in front of him, and when it says behind him patur, that's when he was moving it upwards behind him. So that's why it gave that combination. And the second baraita that says that he is liable when he's swinging it behind him and patur in front of him, well, that's because in front of him he was going up. That's why he's not liable. He's on the way up. But behind him he's going down. So that's why it says he was liable when he goes down. Kan b'yerida shelefanav v'shel acharav, kan b'aliyah shelefanav v'shel acharav. And the third baraita that says that whether in front or behind him he is liable, that was talking about a case where he's going down both in front of him and behind him. In other words, going down. It's talking about this case, we're going down this way, and when he's going down, also behind him. And the last baraita that says that whether in front of him or behind him, he is not liable. That's talking about a case where he was going up in front of him and going up behind him. And so you can reconcile all of these baraitot. And that's what the Mishnah was talking about when it said Zeh Kelal and included some cases that one is liable, some not liable. It was talking about all of these combinations. Le Makkot. Now back to the original question of Rabbi Abhu, where you're climbing a ladder and you boost yourself up, but you push a rung down and the rung falls and kills someone. Let's say that's proposed that this is a machloket between Tanaim, because there's a baraita that says Hayah ole besulam v'nishmeta sheliva mitachtav. Someone's going up a ladder and the rung falls down down from under him and kill someone. Taneh chada chayav v'tanya idach patur. One Baraita says he's liable. One Baraita says he's not liable. That's exactly the question that Rabbi Abu asked Rabbi Yochanan. And see, we have two Baraitot. Ma'ila b'hakami palged amor sabad yidahi amor sabad aliyahi. Is not the controversy between these two Baraitot precisely about this point, that one of them says it's same as going down because you're pushing the rung down. That's called going down, and therefore one's liable to go into exile. And the other Baraita says, no, since I'm trying to go up, so we focus on the person, and I am not liable because I wanted to go up. And on the way up, one is not liable. So isn't that what the two machlok between the two Baraitot are? And we answer, no, not necessarily. La dekula ama aliyahi v'la kashya kan lenizakin kan legalut. Could be everybody would agree that this is called going up because I want to go up. I don't want anything to go down. I'd rather the rung didn't fall. How am I going to get back down later? So that's not. But there's no contradiction. The Baraita that says one is liable, meaning that it says chayav, that liability is not liability to go to exile, but rather liability to pay damages. Let's say the rung falls and hits someone, but doesn't kill the person, but only causes damages. So the law regarding damages is I am liable to pay damages no matter what. If I'm driving and I hit your car by mistake, I still have to pay. It doesn't matter if it's on purpose, by mistake. All cases of damages, Adam mu'ad le'olam, I have to pay. And therefore, if the rung falls, doesn't matter why or which way I'm going, one has to pay. It doesn't matter if it's secure or not secure, one has to pay. That's what it's talking about, nizakin. Whereas, regarding if it kills someone, regarding going to exile, there we consider it on the way up. And I don't have to go into exile on the way up because that would be onis. Or you could say both Baraitot are in fact talking about the law of exile. But they're talking about two slightly different cases. One is talking about a case where the rung of the ladder was worm infested, and so it's as I step on it, it's already sagging a little, and I should have been more careful to make sure that it would not fall down. So there I have to go into exile because I am somewhat liable. Whereas if it was not worm infested and it was nice and strong, so then I had no idea. That's honest. Every time I go up a ladder, it's just a regular ladder. It was not worm infested. It was not sagging at all. So therefore, I do not go into exile. Or maybe both of them were talking about not that they were worm infested, but rather whether it's secure or not. If it's nailed in nice and secure, so then when I step on it, it doesn't go down a little bit at all. So I have no reason to expect that it's a problem. It just broke all at once, totally unexpectedly. Therefore, I am not liable to go into exile. That's honest. Whereas if it's not tightly secured, so then when I step on it, it's already going down, and it's expected to go down because I can see that it's not tightly screwed in. And therefore, that's called I'm pushing it down, and I should have been more careful, and therefore, in that case, I go into exile. Next Mishnah, Nishmat habarzel mikato veharag, Rabbi Omer eno gole, Chachamim omerim gole. If the metal blade of an axe flies off of its handle, Rabbi says he does not go into exile. That's not the case that the pasuk is talking about. Chachamim says he does go into exile. Let's see the pasuk that we're talking about. It's here in Devarim, and it says, a man goes with another fellow into a grove to cut wood, and his hand swings the axe to cut down a tree, and the axe head, the metal, flies off of the handle that's made out of wood and finds his friend, meaning the axe handle goes and hits someone else and kills that person. Then he has to flee and go into exile. So it seems that a Peshat, a straightforward reading of the pasuk, sounds like it is in fact the axe handle that flies off. And that's how Chachamim read it, that he goes into exile. Rabbi reads it differently, as we're going to see in a minute. Now the other case, Mina ayes hamit pakeya, Rabbi omer goleh, Chachamim omrim eno goleh. What if, same case, he is cutting down a tree with an axe, but in this case, the axe head does not fly off. Rather, a piece of wood from the tree that he is trying to cut down down, a piece of wood flies off and hits a person and kills that person. Rabbi says that's the case that this pasuk is talking about, and he goes into exile. Chachamim say no, this is a different case altogether, and this is more indirect according to Chachamim, because it's not that the axe that he's swinging, the head flies off, but rather the axe hits the tree and the piece of the tree flies off. So it's more indirect and therefore does not go into exile. So it's not just what case they're talking about precisely, but also the level of directness. Is it directly the thing that he's swinging, or something that the thing that he's swinging hits and that thing flies off? Tanya, Amar lahem Rabbi Chachamim, B'chi ne'emar v'nashal habarzel me'etzo, v'lo no ne'emar ela min ha'etz. So the B says, I read the pasuk differently than you do. Does it say that the axe head flies off its wood? That would be the wooden handle. It does not say that. It says from the tree, min ha'etz. ועוד נאמר עץ למטה ונאמר עץ למעלה, מה עץ עמוד למעלה מן העץ המתבקע, אף עץ עמוד למטה מן העץ המתבקע. In fact, it says the word tree twice in this pasuk. And the first one is, he takes the axe to cut down a tree. This word ha'etz is clearly talking about the tree that he's trying to cut down. And therefore, the next time it says min ha'etz, it is also talking about the tree that he's trying to cut down, not the handle. It doesn't call the handle that a tree. That would be etzah. It doesn't say that. It says min ha'etz. And therefore, the B is going to read it like this. And he, as hand, swings the axe to cut down a tree. And then he's going to read this, we're going to see in a second, as not nashal, which is a kal verb, but rather nishel habarzel, an active verb, a pil, that is a transitive verb, and the barzel, the axe, causes to fly a piece min ha'etz from the wood of the tree, and the piece of the wood of the tree flies off and kills someone. And so therefore, Rabbi says, my reading is better. I'm reading ha'etz consistently as talking about the tree. It's a piece of the tree that flies off. Amar Rav Chia bar Asher Amarav, Ushnehem mikra echad darshu v'nashal habarzel min ha'es. Rabbi Chia says, name of Rav, they're both learning their laws from the very same pasuk, the one that we just read, that the blade displaces from the wood. Rabbi Sabar yeshem la masoret v'nishel ketib. Rabbi says we should follow the written text, and the written text has no vowels in it, and so the same three letters, nun, shin, lamed, can be read nashal. It can also be read nishel as a pil, and in pil it's a transitive verb that the axe is causing to be dislodged a piece of wood from the tree. Whereas the rabbis say that we have to follow the way it's written. There's a tradition, the way it's pronounced. There's a tradition of the vocalization. Even before there were nikudot, right? There was a way that it was pronounced, and so that is authoritative. Not the way it's written is authoritative, but the way it's pronounced is authoritative. And therefore, we read it nashal, and since that's a kal verb, so it means it's an intransitive verb, and then you have to say venashal habarzel. The barzel is the subject. Nashal habarzel. The barzel is what's going flying, not causing something else to go flying. Now, is it true that according to the B, we give authority to the way something is read, the masoret, the written tradition? Is that true that he says halacha can follow the letters and you can revocalize the letters? V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak v'Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda ben Roes, uBet Shammai v'Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbi Akiva, kolu sevira lehu yesh em lamikra. But Rabbi Yochanan said that Rabbi, among all these other sages, they all say that we have to follow the way it's read, the traditional vocalization. Halacha follows the vocalization, and so you can't simply follow the consonants. And Rabbi agrees with that. So that's why. So we answer Hanu dekamar lehu ve'od. That's why he gave two answers over here. He says one answer and ve'od. He wanted to say that doesn't say venashal me'etzov alon nemad ela min ha'etz. And so here he's quoting the venashal. But the second proof is the fact that it says ha'etz twice, and since the first one is talking about the tree, the second one also has to be talking about the tree. So that's why the B gave an added proof, because even the B agrees that generally one should follow the way it's pronounced, and Yusef ben Ashal. But here we have the other word, ve'etz, that he wants to read consistently, and so that's an overriding factor in the B's reading to say that it's a two-step process, that it's the swinging of the axe that causes the piece of the tree to fly out, and yet in that case one is liable to exile, and the rabbis would say, no, that's too indirect. אמר רב פאפא, מה דשדה פיסה לדיקלה ואתר תמרה ואזור תמרה וכתול, באנו למחלוקת דרבי ורבנן. So one last case, Rav Papa says, if someone takes a clod of dirt and throws it onto a palm tree, and then some dates, it hits the palm tree, and some dates all the way on top of the palm tree fall down and kill someone. It goes from some high up, maybe a whole cluster might hit someone and kill them. Well, what would be the verdict in that case? That would be subject to machloket between Rabbi and Rabbanan. Rabbi would say he is liable to go into exile because it's the same thing as the axe case. Someone took the axe, that would be like the clod of earth, hit the tree, and then a piece of the tree flew out and killed someone. That's what Rabbi says is liable to exile, even though it's a two-step process. And same thing here, the clod of the earth hits the tree, and then the cluster of dates that was part of the tree falls onto the person, so that's the same, and he goes into exile. Whereas Rabbanan say, no, this is too indirect. Only when I'm swinging the axe itself, the thing that I'm swinging, that flies out. The axe head flies off. In that case, that's direct from my power causes it to fly off, and that's where one is liable to exile. But if it's a two-step process, like if it hits the tree and a piece of the tree flies off, then that's more indirect. And then in this case also, it's also indirect. It's two steps of hitting the tree and then the cluster falling down. So the Banan would say that this is no exile. It's more far removed and even less liability than shogeg. We ask, Peshita ma'udetema kekoch kamashmalan. So in this basically the same case, well, you might have thought that the case of the palm tree with the dates is more removed because it's the force of his force. It's taking the force of a clod of dirt that he throws from his hand and hits the tree and hits some part of the tree and causes the tree to shake, and then the dates fall down. So you might think that's a little bit more far removed. It's a force of a force, and that the case with the axe is a little bit more direct in that the spot where I'm hitting with the axe, that itself flies off. So you might distinguish between them. So the Papa says no, there's no distinction. And the case of the axe hitting the tree is the same. It's a force of a force, and one is liable to exile in that case. Okay, so what would be a case where the B would say that one is exempt from going to exile because it's indirect as a force of a force? So how would we have such a case? So you'd have to add yet another step. In other words, the B thinks that the initial throwing of the clod, that's an extension of yourself. So that's not yet indirect. So if I took a clod of dirt and one threw it onto a branch, and then that branch hit a cluster of dates, and then that cluster of dates fell and killed someone, then that would be a case of being too indirect by adding another step. That's called a force after you threw it. And that is the case where even the B would agree that it's too far removed, and therefore there's no liability to exile because it's totally indirect. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.